Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that Democrats and Republicans were close to a deal on spending caps. And while there's been some progress made on the issue of reaching a permanent spending deal, there's been little to no action on one of the sticking points of past budget negotiations, DACA reform. Well, Senators John McCain and Chris Coons introduced a bipartisan plan in the Senate Monday. It would grant legal status to so-called dreamers and even increase security along the U.S.-Mexico border. However, their plan did not address funding for a wall along the border, something, of course, as you know, the president said any deal on DACA must include. Well, all of this has the White House working on overdrive, trying to decide whether they'll release a 10-page memo. It was authored by Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, written in response to a Republican memo, which was released last week. President Trump has said that memo clears him in the ongoing Russia probe. For more on all of this, we bring in Ken Thomas. He's a White House reporter for the Associated Press. Ken, we heard earlier the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is casting a bit of doubt on this March 5th deadline that'll be extended for these dreamers. What are you hearing on that?
Yeah, I was traveling with the president yesterday in Ohio, and the White House made pretty clear to us that March 5th is the deadline. So what we have now is this mix of immigration and budget once again. The House is expected to pass a spending bill later today that would marry the spending that would get them to about March 23rd, and also a full year for the Pentagon budget. That's a non-starter for Senate Democrats. So at the same time, you have Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer trying to work out some sort of longer-term deal that you could eventually bring the House Republicans on board with.
And you mentioned, the president also said that he's not going to sign any sort of DACA reform unless it's got that funding for the border wall. There was a bipartisan plan by Senators John McCain and Chris Coons yesterday. It didn't have funding for that border wall. So do you think the White House is just going to bypass this entirely? How much of a sticking point is it? Will he not sign this bipartisan plan?
Yeah, the Coons-McCain bill was dismissed out of hand. The White House said it was actually even worse than the McCain-Durbin proposal that we've seen before. So there's definitely a push by the White House to get those four pillars that the president keeps referring to into some sort of immigration plan. They're going to have an event later today on the MS-13 gang that we've seen, cause a lot of problems in places like Long Island. So that kind of speaks to where the White House is right now. It's much more focused on that broader package that they would like to see, as opposed to something that would be much more modest and narrower in its focus, just on getting some sort of legal status for the dreamers and perhaps some sort of border security that would not necessarily be a wall. The White House wants much more than that.
The House also is expected to take up the spending bill today. The House, how concerned is the White House about getting another spending bill passed?
They want something that's more long term. They've been pushing for a more permanent solution. They say this idea of living from continuing resolution to continuing resolution doesn't help us, doesn't help government agencies plan for the long term. I would say that there doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for a government shutdown this time. It's certainly a looming deadline. It's coming on Thursday at midnight. But I think Democrats realized the last time that they just were not going to be able to extract much leverage on immigration if they pushed for some sort of shutdown. So the expectation is that some sort of spending plan will get through before the end of the week that will fund the government a few more weeks, and then we'll eventually get to some sort of reckoning on immigration, most likely the first week of March.
And we've heard multiple reports the White House could talk infrastructure on Monday. What are you hearing?
Yeah, sources are telling me that the president is expected to put out the principles for his infrastructure plan on Monday. We're expecting it to be about $1.5 trillion in funding. The key issue here is that the funding from the federal government, the commitment from the federal government, is only going to be about $200 billion. Typically, in the past, the federal government has helped about funded about 80% of these projects, and we're expecting the commitment to be much lower. So cities and states and local governments are going to be on the hook for a lot more money, and the White House is going to be pushing these local governments and states to get more private investment into these projects. It's something that a lot of governors and mayors don't really like, though.
I want to switch gears and ask you, though, about the House Intelligence Committee. They sent the Democratic rebuttal to the Nunes memo to the White House last night. Any sense of what might be in that Democratic memo, and how's the White House responding?
So we expect the Democratic memo to be much broader in scope. The Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee felt like the Republican memo was much more limited and was skewered in a way that would make it look like the FBI, was not acting with propriety as it relates to the president, and not treating him fairly. We're now in a 5-day review period. The White House is going to hear from the FBI and the intelligence communities, their attorneys, on whether this memo could be released. We're getting suggestions from the White House that the president would be willing to release this Democratic memo if it passes muster with the FBI and the intelligence community. I think the key thing that we're going to have to look for, though, is how much of this memo would be redacted. If a lot of the memo is redacted, you're going to hear from Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee saying it's just being, reviewed in a way that doesn't allow them to present their case. So we're going to see that over the next few days. I believe the deadline for this review will be the end of the week, most likely Friday or Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, especially as a lot of Republicans on that committee have said that there is a lot to be redacted in that memo. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. I want to ask you, though, we know Steve Bannon was supposed to testify on the Hill today. Any word on that?
It's not clear. Bannon's testimony has been expected, but there's been a lot of back and forth on whether he would testify or not. He's a key witness in this whole deliberations. He saw a lot both from the campaign end and here in the administration. So there's a lot of speculation, a lot of interest in whether Bannon will testify and exactly what he will say, how far he's willing to go. He's obviously been at war with the president recently. The president felt betrayed by Steve Bannon in a lot of respects. So we'll be very interested in what Steve Bannon will talk about.
Absolutely. Looks like a busy week for you, Ken, at the White House. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rena.